The history of Freemasonry is a vast and fascinating realm, filled with riddles, mysteries, and legends that have captivated people for centuries with its unusual nature and veil of secrecy. The mere mention of Freemasons sparks curiosity and conjures associations with secret societies, enigmatic rituals, and hidden meanings, as if straight from the pages of adventure novels. However, behind this romantic and mystical facade lies a very real history, traceable from the Middle Ages to the present day, encompassing many cultures and eras. The word Freemasonry itself is rooted in the French language and literally means stonemason. This is no coincidence, but a direct reference to the origin of this organization. In its early days, Freemasons were a community of skilled master builders who erected the majestic castles, cathedrals, and monasteries that adorned medieval Europe. These individuals were united not only by common professional interests, but also by profound knowledge of the art of construction and strict rules of conduct, carefully passed down from older generations to young apprentices, ensuring the continuity of craftsmanship. To protect the secrets of their craft from prying eyes, they created closed professional unions, known as guilds, accessible only to those who had undergone initiation and proven their commitment to shared values. But what happened next? How did building guilds evolve into the mysterious society we know today? Subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Many more interesting videos await you, and will continue. Over time, a unique culture of communication and interaction began to form around these building guilds, extending far beyond simple professional relationships. These were not just unusual professional communities, but true brotherhoods, whose members were bound by obligations of mutual aid, support, and preservation of professional secrets passed down from generation to generation. Within these associations, a strict hierarchy was established to effectively transmit knowledge and control the quality of construction work, which was critical for erecting durable and safe structures. Each member of the guild knew their place and role in the common cause, which contributed to cohesion and efficiency. But how long could such closed communities exist in a changing world? Gradually, the significance of building guilds began to shift. Toward the end of the Middle Ages, and with the advent of the Renaissance, as science and art began to flourish, the need for such closed associations of builders gradually diminished. Construction itself lost some of its professional secrets, which became increasingly accessible due to the spread of knowledge and new technologies. It was then that the guilds began to transform, gradually admitting people far removed from the building trade, but close to philosophy and spiritual pursuits, such as scholars, thinkers, and members of the aristocracy interested in patronizing the arts. But what did these new members bring to the old guilds? These new guild members brought intellectual and moral ideas with them, breathing new life into the old associations and giving them a new direction. Thus, craft guilds gradually transformed into a completely different community, now consisting primarily of thinkers, scholars, and intellectuals who used building symbolism to express their own philosophical reflections on humanity and society, employing it as a metaphorical language. Real construction gradually gave way to allegorical construction, in which the stone and tools became metaphors reflecting the human pursuit of inner perfection, self-knowledge, and moral growth. This transition from practical craft to philosophical reflection marked a turning point in the history of Freemasonry. It is this important historical transition from practical construction to the philosophical and symbolic that explains why Freemasonry has acquired such mystery, and why its symbols have become surrounded by numerous legends and conjectures passed down by word of mouth. But to understand more deeply how craft builders were able to lay the foundation for an intellectual brotherhood, we must turn to their origins, to the medieval building guilds that became the initial core of this amazing phenomenon. But what were these medieval building guilds, and how did they function? Medieval Europe was a world where lofty ideals coexisted with hard work and the daily struggle for survival, a world of contrasts and contradictions. But it was in this era, amidst wars and epidemics, famine and superstition, that grandiose architectural structures arose, capable of astonishing the imagination even of modern people accustomed to skyscrapers and complex engineering solutions. Behind these majestic Gothic cathedrals, castles and monasteries lay the labor of a special group of masters, professional stonemasons, united in closed communities known as building guilds. Who were these masters, and what secrets did they possess? Stonemasons of the Middle Ages possessed a unique set of skills and knowledge necessary to transform a pile of stones into a magnificent temple worthy of admiration by posterity. They were simultaneously engineers, architects, and artists, as they were required not only to erect strong walls, but also to create elegant arches, complex vaults, and intricate decorations, giving the building its unique appearance. Mastering these arts required years of training and practice, carefully guarded from prying eyes to maintain a competitive advantage and ensure the continuity of craftsmanship. How did they do it? Over time, building guilds became closed professional unions with a strict internal hierarchy and a complex system of knowledge transfer, ensuring a high level of skill and preservation of the secrets of the craft. An apprentice would join the guild as a teenager and study the craft for many years under the guidance of an experienced master, gradually mastering both practical techniques for working with stone and the fundamentals of mathematics, geometry, and architecture necessary for designing and constructing complex structures. When their skill reached the required level, the apprentice was entitled to be called a journeyman, and then, after demonstrating their knowledge and skills in a special test, could become a master capable of leading independent projects. Such a strict hierarchy and lengthy training had their reasons. But what were they? The craft of stonemasonry was shrouded in secrets that allowed the construction of buildings capable of withstanding the test of time, while preserving their beauty and strength for centuries. These secrets included precise geometric proportions that ensured the stability of structures, the correct ratio of various elements, special recipes for mortars that bound the stones together, and unique methods of stone processing that allowed the creation of durable and aesthetically pleasing facades. The building guilds jealously guarded this knowledge within their community, passing it down from generation to generation, and using a system of secret signs, symbols, and rituals, understandable only to the initiated and serving as a kind of professional code. But what did these symbols and rituals mean to the stonemasons themselves? The symbolism of the building guilds reflected not only the professional skills of the masters, but also their philosophy, views of the world, and moral principles that defined their lives and activities. The three most important and profound instruments were the compass, square, and trowel, each of which had its unique interpretation and place in the guild's system of values. The compass held special meaning for stonemasons, as it served as an instrument for precisely measuring and constructing perfect circles, necessary for creating arches, vaults, and other architectural elements. But why was the circle so important to medieval builders? In a symbolic sense, the compass represented the masters striving for harmony and perfection, for creating buildings that reflected divine order and beauty. For the medieval mind, the circle was always a symbol of divine fullness and order, a symbol of perfection and infinity, and the use of the compass in the construction of buildings meant the embodiment of the divine plan in stone, giving the building spiritual meaning. Thus, craftsmen expressed the spiritual ideals of their time through material objects, turning construction into a kind of religious act. But what about the other instruments? The square, designed for creating right angles and ideal accuracy in the construction of walls, also acquired a deep philosophical meaning, going beyond mere functionality. In a world full of injustice, deceit, and misrepresentation, stonemasons perceived the right angle as a metaphor for moral integrity and the uprightness of human character, as a symbol of justice and incorruptibility. Through the symbol of the square, the masters reminded each other of the need to lead a life based on justice and sincerity as a necessary condition for successful work, and respect in the brotherhood as a guarantee of harmonious relations between members of the guild. But what did the trowel symbolize? And finally, the trowel, an instrument designed for applying and leveling the mortar that connects individual stones into a single, strong, and durable structure. Symbolically, it reflected the idea of brotherhood, unity, and mutual support that underlies the existence of the guild. Just as mortar binds stones together, turning them into a strong wall capable of withstanding any test, so the solidarity of the guild members bound them into a single professional family, ready to come to the aid in difficult times. The trowel expressed the idea of unity in collaborative work, respect, and fidelity to the common cause, as a necessary condition for achieving common goals and the prosperity of the guild. All these instruments, which became symbols, were used in the rituals and traditions of the guilds, emphasizing their importance and significance for members of the community. Thus, everyday construction activity gradually turned into something more than just a craft, acquiring a spiritual and philosophical dimension. But how did these symbols and rituals influence the further evolution of Freemasonry? Over time, professional guilds, while preserving these traditions, began to attract the attention of people far removed from construction, but interested in their philosophical and moral ideas, drawn by the wisdom and depth of symbolism. It was then that the gradual transformation of builders' communities into a brotherhood of thinkers, philosophers, and intellectuals began, who later became known throughout the world as Freemasons, while preserving many of the symbols and rituals of their predecessors. But before Freemasonry became an intellectual and philosophical movement, the building guilds had to undergo a crucial transition, when their knowledge and traditions went beyond the professional circle and began to attract representatives of the intellectual elite of Europe, interested in studying ancient wisdom and spiritual self-improvement. So, what happened during this period? It is about this key moment of transition from medieval building craft to a philosophical brotherhood that we will talk about in the next part of our lecture, revealing the causes and consequences of this important historical event. The transition of building guilds from practical craft to a philosophical and intellectual community began in the late 16th century and developed most actively in the 17th century, in an era of profound change and intellectual upheaval. During this period, medieval Europe entered an era of profound change, characterized by scientific discoveries, religious reforms, and social transformations. The development of science, the weakening of church influence, and the emergence of new ideas about the world and humanity created the ground for profound changes in Masonic lodges as well, opening new opportunities for intellectual pursuits and spiritual development. If earlier the doors of guilds were open exclusively to professional builders and architects, now people of completely different professions began to enter their midst more and more often, attracted by the opportunity to study ancient knowledge and philosophical concepts. The first of these new Masons were representatives of the intellectual elite, eager for knowledge and spiritual enlightenment. Who were these people, and what attracted them to Freemasonry? Philosophers, scientists, mathematicians, alchemists, doctors, and aristocrats interested in the mysteries of the universe and the secrets of human consciousness increasingly turned their eyes to Masonic lodges, seeing in them an opportunity for intellectual communication and the exchange of knowledge. They were attracted by the opportunity to study spiritual and moral issues without the pressure of the church and authorities, freely expressing their thoughts and ideas in a circle of like-minded people. Among such new participants were the famous Scottish alchemist and physician Robert Morey, the famous philosopher Elias Ashmole, and the Scottish mathematician and astronomer James Gregory, each of whom contributed to the development of Masonic philosophy and symbolism. But where exactly did these changes take place? One of the first countries where the gradual transition from a building craft to an intellectual community began was Scotland, known for its ancient traditions and rich history. It was there, already in the 17th century, in the lodges of Edinburgh and other cities, that people far removed from the practical activities of stonemasons, but interested in studying ancient knowledge and philosophical concepts, were actively accepted. In these lodges, stone and building tools were transformed into allegories through which philosophical and moral problems were discussed, opening new horizons for intellectual development. How exactly were these allegories used? For example, Scottish intellectual lodges paid special attention to the study of ancient texts and legends, considered issues of morality and human spiritual improvement, striving for knowledge of truth and achieving harmony with the world. They actively discussed how the symbolism of building tools could be applied to the moral education of the individual, forming high moral principles and ethical norms. Members of the Scottish lodges did not just conduct philosophical conversations. They also created a special internal culture that combined ancient legends, esoteric ideas, and strict rules of conduct, promoting spiritual growth and self-improvement. Lodge meetings took place in private, away from prying eyes by candlelight, creating an atmosphere of mystery and comfort, surrounded by symbols and rituals inherited from old building traditions and filled with new philosophical meaning. It was in such an environment that the tradition of accepting new members through initiation, a special rite of passage, was formed, where the candidate had to demonstrate their understanding of the moral and philosophical ideas of the lodge, as well as their willingness to follow its principles and ideals. The lodges themselves usually gathered in special rooms, equipped taking into account Masonic symbolism, or even in private homes, where any ideas could be openly discussed in a friendly and confidential atmosphere, without fear of persecution or censorship. So, what was discussed at these meetings? There they read and discussed the works of ancient philosophers, medieval alchemists, and modern thinkers, exchanging opinions and expanding their horizons. Participants could discuss the most complex questions of being and morality, without fear of accusations of heresy or violation of established social norms, which was especially important in an era of religious conflicts and political repression. In addition to Scotland, a similar transition was actively taking place in France, where Freemasonry acquired particular popularity among the aristocracy and intellectual elite. But how did Freemasonry develop in France? In the French lodges of the 17th century, members included not only scientists and philosophers, but also representatives of the upper nobility, striving for knowledge and spiritual development. Among them were people close to the royal court, who perceived membership in lodges as a prestigious intellectual occupation, emphasizing their high social status and education, as well as giving them the opportunity to communicate with like-minded people and influence public opinion. In these French lodges, intellectual pursuits were complemented by mystical quests and allegorical study of ancient traditions, including those associated with the chivalric orders of the Middle Ages, alchemy, and Kabbalah, giving Freemasonry an element of mystery and esotericism. But the key moment in the history of Freemasonry occurred elsewhere. Where and when? In the summer of 1717, an event occurred in London that forever changed the history of Freemasonry and gave it new status and significance, turning it from disparate lodges into an organized and influential movement. On June 24th, on the day of St. John the Baptist, representatives of 4 independent London lodges gathered in the famous Goose and Gridiron Tavern and agreed to create a single central organization, which later became known as the Grand Lodge of London and Westminster, becoming the center of the Masonic movement throughout the world. So, what was this new organization? It is from this moment that it is customary to count the existence of modern organized Freemasonry, with its clear structure, rules, and traditions. Before this, Masonic lodges were small and often unconnected associations in which philosophical questions and ideas of moral improvement were discussed without a single leadership and coordination. Now, 4 London lodges, located in the Goose and Gridiron, Crown, Apple Tree, and Cup and Grapes taverns, decided to create a centralized structure with common rules, traditions, and uniform rituals to strengthen the Masonic movement and expand its influence. Why was this so important? This step was thought out and prepared in advance, since the meeting participants understood the need to create a common authority capable of streamlining the activities of the lodges and increasing the prestige of the Masonic movement as a whole, attracting new members and supporters into its ranks. Anthony Sayer, a man with a good reputation among lodge members, but who did not hold high positions and did not have much influence in society, was elected as the first Grand Master of the newly formed Grand Lodge, which avoided conflicts and disputes when choosing a leader. But did he remain at the head of the organization for long? However, in the first years of its existence, the Grand Lodge quickly began to attract representatives of the English aristocracy and social elite, which significantly strengthened its position in society. In 1721, Duke John Montagu, a well-known and influential man at the royal court who enjoyed respect and authority, became the Grand Master. His appointment significantly raised the authority of the lodge, and the participation of aristocrats made membership in it prestigious and fashionable among the intellectual and social elite of England, contributing to the spread of Masonic ideas and principles. What tasks did the new organization face? One of the most important tasks of the new organization was to streamline and consolidate the common rules and standards of Freemasonry, to ensure unity and consistency in the activities of various lodges. It was during this period that the famous 3-degree system of initiation was formed, consisting of the degrees of apprentice, journeyman, and master, each of which had its own unique ritual and symbolism. The rituals of each degree were carefully developed and filled with philosophical content, moral teachings, and symbolic actions aimed at the spiritual and intellectual development of the Mason. How did this work in practice? These ceremonies were to promote the spiritual and intellectual development of the Mason, teach him the principles of morality and fraternal solidarity, forming high moral qualities and ethical standards. In addition, the Grand Lodge of London, for the first time, introduced common constitutional documents regulating the internal structure of the lodges, defining their structure, rights, and obligations. The most famous of these documents are the Constitutions of the Freemasons, written by James Anderson in 1723. Who was this person, and what was the importance of his work? He was a Scottish clergyman and a prominent member of the lodge, possessed of deep knowledge and literary talent. He systematized the rules and traditions, defined the principles of relationships between lodges and members of the brotherhood, and laid the foundations of Masonic philosophy, formulating the basic principles and ideals of the movement. These constitutions became the foundation of the entire Masonic movement and were adopted by Freemasons in many other countries, becoming a model for emulation and a basis for creating their own constitutions. What were the results of the activities of the Grand Lodge of London? Thanks to its organization and clear structure, the Grand Lodge of London quickly gained authority not only in England, but also beyond its borders, becoming a center of attraction for intellectuals and public figures. Representatives of the upper classes, prominent intellectuals and cultural figures began to join the Masonic ranks, drawn to the free atmosphere and the ideals of humanism and tolerance that prevailed in the lodges. Among these individuals were philosophers, writers, scientists, and even diplomats who, within the walls of Masonic lodges, could freely discuss ideas of enlightenment and social progress without fear of persecution or accusations of violating traditional orders, which facilitated the spread of Masonic ideas throughout the world. From England, Masonic ideas and organizational principles soon spread throughout Europe, like rays of sunlight penetrating the continent's most remote corners, encompassing France, Germany, Holland, and other countries, attracting more and more supporters to their ranks. Within a few decades, Masonic lodges would also appear in North America, gaining increasing popularity and influencing the intellectual and political life of entire continents. becoming centers of enlightenment and freedom of thought. Thus, the creation of the Grand Lodge in London was not merely a local event of significance only to English Masons. It was a pivotal historical moment that gave Freemasonry its modern structure, clear rules, and international significance, transforming it into an organization capable of influencing cultural, political, and philosophical processes in Europe and beyond, shaping new ideals and values. A central event in the life of any Mason has always been the initiation ceremony, marking their entry into the brotherhood and the beginning of their journey of spiritual self-improvement. This was a rigorous system consisting of 3 distinct stages that a candidate progressed through sequentially and at specific intervals, demonstrating their commitment to Masonic ideals and their readiness to follow its principles. How did this process unfold? All 3 rites were never performed at once, to give the candidate time to reflect on the knowledge gained and prepare for the next stage. A person gradually transitioned from the first degree to the second, and only then could they be admitted to the third, highest degree, demonstrating their diligence and devotion to the brotherhood. The initiation of an apprentice took place in a carefully prepared lodge room, decorated with Masonic symbols, and creating an atmosphere of mystery and solemnity. What happened during this ceremony? The candidate, unaware of the ceremony's details beforehand, entered the room blindfolded and with their chest partially exposed, symbolizing their spiritual blindness, ignorance, and sincere openness before the brothers, and their willingness to accept new knowledge and values. They were greeted by members of the lodge, who asked a series of questions about their intentions, whether they were ready to abide by the moral and ethical laws of the brotherhood, keep its secrets, and constantly strive for self-improvement to ensure their sincerity and the seriousness of their intentions. What happened after the questions were answered? After answering the questions, the candidate took a solemn oath, placing their hand on the Bible or another text sacred to them, confirming their loyalty to the brotherhood and their willingness to abide by its principles. Only then was the blindfold removed, and for the first time they saw the decoration of the lodge and the faces of their new brothers ready to welcome them into their family. What did this moment symbolize? This moment symbolized spiritual awakening, the exit from the darkness of ignorance into the light of truth, the beginning of a new stage in the candidate's life, when they gained the opportunity to touch ancient wisdom and find new friends and like-minded individuals. Then, the basic principles and goals of Freemasonry were explained to them. They were introduced to the initial responsibilities of an apprentice, and they were given instructions on how they should conduct themselves in society and within the brotherhood to worthily represent Masonic ideals and values. The candidate was admitted to the second degree after some time, when the senior brothers were convinced of their diligence and seriousness of intent, assessing their behavior and attitude towards the brotherhood. How did the initiation of a fellowcraft proceed? The initiation of a fellowcraft was more complex and substantial, aimed at the intellectual development and understanding of the brotherhood's philosophy, requiring the candidate to have deep knowledge and the ability to reason. During the ceremony, the candidate underwent a symbolic journey through the temple, encountering various obstacles and questions along the way, requiring them to be able to reason and interpret symbols to prove their maturity and readiness for further spiritual growth. What was the candidate supposed to demonstrate? The fellowcraft had to answer questions about a person's obligations to society and the brotherhood, about the meaning of the moral principles of Freemasonry, and show their understanding of the symbolism they had studied in the first degree to convince the brothers of their readiness for the next stage. Only after being convinced that the candidate had assimilated the moral and intellectual foundations did the lodge admit them to the second degree and give them deeper instructions on the tasks of a fellowcraft, to know the world and oneself, to develop reason and moral qualities, and to serve as an example for less experienced apprentices, to become a worthy member of the brotherhood and a useful citizen of society. And what happened at the third most important degree? Only those Masons who had successfully mastered the first 2 degrees and proven their spiritual and moral development demonstrating their devotion to the brotherhood and their willingness to serve its ideals, were admitted to the third and most important degree, the degree of master. The third degree was the most complex and symbolically rich, representing a kind of drama which the members of the lodge played out together with the candidate to deepen their understanding of Masonic values and principles. What did this drama represent? The central theme was the symbolic journey of the legendary master Hiram Abiff, the builder of King Solomon's temple, who was killed for refusing to reveal the secrets of his craft, symbolizing faithfulness to one's convictions and willingness to sacrifice one's life for the truth. The candidate literally experienced Hiram's fate in the form of a ritual performance to soak in his spirit and understand the meaning of his feat. How exactly did the candidate experience this fate? First, they had to symbolically pass through the temple, where 3 members of the lodge portrayed conspirators demanding that they reveal the secrets of the master. They stopped them, demanding that they reveal the master's secrets, threatening them and exerting pressure. When the candidate refused to do so, showing steadfastness and loyalty to their principles, they were symbolically struck, first with a light touch to their shoulders and chest, and then carefully laid on the floor, depicting their death, so that they could feel the full tragedy of the moment. This moment of the rite was central, symbolizing self-sacrifice and fidelity to one's ideals. What happened next? The candidate lay on the floor in a state of complete helplessness, experiencing the symbolic death of their old self, freeing themselves from their weaknesses and shortcomings. Then, the masters of the lodge raised them with a special ritual gesture known only to the initiated, symbolizing the resurrection of Hiram and his victory over death. This act symbolized the candidate's spiritual resurrection, their new birth not just as a member of the brotherhood, but as a person with a deeper understanding of the value of life and the importance of moral principles, ready for new achievements and service to humanity. After the ceremony, the candidate was explained the meaning of what they had just gone through, revealing the symbolic significance of each stage and action so that they could better understand Masonic values and principles. Death is only a symbolic reminder of the transience of physical existence, that everything material is fleeting, and that true life and immortality lie in spiritual development, fidelity to duty, and moral ideals which remain eternal and timeless. The completion of the third-degree ritual was the full acceptance of the candidate as a master, the presentation of insignia symbolizing their new status, and the explanation of new duties associated with responsibility to younger brothers, the lodge, and society, so that they could worthily represent Masonic ideals and values. But what did these insignia symbolize? The symbols of Freemasonry often become objects of various myths and conspiracy theories, which mix ancient legends, religious images, and speculation about secret control over humanity, creating an aura of mystery and mysticism around Freemasonry. However, behind each of these symbols lies a concrete history and a deep meaning, which is much more interesting than the most mysterious speculations, revealing the philosophical and moral principles of Freemasonry. One of the most famous and frequently discussed symbols is the all-seeing eye, also called the Eye of Providence. What does it mean? This symbol represents an eye enclosed in a triangle and surrounded by a halo of rays, creating the impression of divine presence and omniscience. Although today it is perceived by many as something mystical or even frightening, associated with secret societies and conspiracies, its origin is linked to the most ancient traditions of humanity and religious beliefs. How did this symbol appear? Even in ancient Egypt, there was a similar symbol, the Eye of Horus, symbolizing divine protection and wisdom, considered a powerful amulet and talisman. Later, in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, the image of the eye was used in Christian iconography as a symbol of the all-seeing God, watching the actions of people and knowing their innermost thoughts and intentions. What interpretation did the Masons adopt? The Masons adopted precisely this Christian interpretation of the symbol, investing it with the idea of supreme moral oversight, reminding them of the need to follow moral principles and be honest with themselves and others. The eye of providence on the walls of the lodges was intended to constantly remind members of the brotherhood that their actions are always under the observation of a higher power, which means that every Mason bears moral responsibility for their actions and must strive for self-improvement. And what does the checkered floor mean? Another significant symbol, which has become one of the central elements in the decoration of Masonic lodges, is the checkered floor, consisting of alternating black and white squares, creating a visual effect of duality and contrast. This symbol dates back to ancient ideas about the world as an eternal arena for the struggle of opposing forces, light and darkness, good and evil, order and chaos. But in Freemasonry, it has acquired an even deeper meaning, reflecting the complexity of human life and the need for constant choice. So, what does the checkered floor symbolize for a Mason? For a Mason, the checkered floor symbolizes not only the struggle of opposites, but also human life itself, consisting of constant choices and moral decisions, each of which has its own consequences. A Mason standing on such a floor during ceremonies must remember that his life is a series of decisions, each of which can tip the scales toward good or evil, requiring wisdom and discernment. It is a reminder of the importance of moral choice and responsibility for the consequences of one's actions, as well as the need to strive for harmony and balance in one's life. And what can be said about the pillars Boaz and Jachin? No less significant in Masonic symbolism are the two famous pillars, Boaz and Jachin, borrowed from the ancient tradition of building King Solomon's first temple in Jerusalem, symbolizing its greatness and spiritual significance. According to the biblical narrative, these pillars were erected in front of the temple entrance and symbolized stability and strength, as well as wisdom and harmony, serving as a reminder of divine presence and patronage. But what meaning did the Masons attach to them? For Masons, the pillars acquired a philosophical meaning, representing two sides of human existence, the material and the spiritual, both necessary to achieve harmony and wholeness. Boaz, standing on the left, signified physical stability, a person's ability to withstand life's difficulties and trials while maintaining strength of spirit and faith in one's ideals. What did the pillar Jachin symbolize? Jachin stood on the right and symbolized intellectual and spiritual growth, the pursuit of wisdom and inner perfection, which help a person understand the meaning of life and achieve harmony with oneself and the world around them. The pillars reminded each Mason that a harmonious life is impossible without a combination of the spiritual and the material, reason and willpower, without a desire for knowledge and self-improvement. What can be said about the pyramid with the eye? Finally, one of the most recognizable and mysterious figures of Masonic symbolism is the pyramid, often depicted together with the all-seeing eye, creating an impression of mystical power and secret knowledge. Many associate this symbol with ancient Egyptian buildings and occult practices, attributing various magical properties and esoteric meanings to it. However, the real meaning of the pyramid for Masons lies elsewhere, reflecting their philosophical and spiritual principles. What does it mean? The pyramid is an allegory of a person's spiritual ascension. Despite the deep philosophical meaning of Masonic rituals and symbolism, persistent myths have formed around the Brotherhood for centuries, accusing Masons of occultism and even Satanism, creating an aura of mystery and ominousness around them. These accusations did not arise by chance and are related to the peculiarities of the Masonic Brotherhood, its secrecy, the mysterious nature of its rituals, as well as a misunderstanding of their real meaning by the general public, prone to speculation and fantasies. To understand the origin of these legends, one needs to turn to history and consider the factors that contributed to their emergence and spread. What are these factors? The first suspicions that Masons were allegedly associated with occultism arose as early as the 18th century, when the Brotherhood actively spread throughout Europe, attracting more and more supporters and causing concern among conservative forces. Masonic lodges held meetings behind closed doors, away from prying eyes, and their members kept their rituals and internal structure strictly secret in order to avoid persecution and maintain their independence. To the uninitiated, such secrecy seemed suspicious and even frightening, giving rise to various rumors and speculations. Why did secrecy arouse suspicion? In the society of that time, any closed community with incomprehensible rites automatically caused alarm and became the object of speculation, especially if it was associated with the intellectual elite and the aristocracy. People tended to fill gaps in their knowledge with fantastic and often frightening stories, attributing various atrocities and conspiracies to the Masons. The Catholic Church was especially active against the Masons, seeing them as competitors and ideological opponents threatening its power and influence. How did the Church fight Freemasonry? As early as 1738, Pope Clement XII issued a document in which Masons were outlawed and their gatherings were called heretical, undermining the foundations of the Christian faith. The Church claimed that Masons performed secret anti-Christian rituals, rejected the divine order, and sought to destroy the traditional foundations of society by spreading ideas of freedom and equality. This document greatly influenced the perception of Masons in Europe, giving rise to many rumors and accusations that the lodges were allegedly engaged in magic, black masses, and other prohibited practices that harmed society. And how did rumors about Satanism spread? Rumors about Satanism in Freemasonry intensified significantly in the 19th century, when the era of Romanticism arrived in Europe, which was accompanied by increased interest in mysticism and occult knowledge, creating fertile ground for the spread of various rumors and speculations. It was at this time that the French writer Léo Taxil appeared, who played a special role in shaping the perception of Freemasonry as a satanic cult, publishing a series of sensational books and articles. What did he write? In the 1880s, Taxil published a series of books and articles in which he claimed that Masonic lodges secretly worshipped Lucifer, performed gruesome satanic rites, and plotted conspiracies against Christianity and society, seeking world domination. His works were immensely popular, were translated into many languages, and caused a real sensation, fueling public interest in Freemasonry and simultaneously arousing fear and distrust. Did Taxil confess to deception? Later, Léo Taxil publicly confessed that his stories were fabricated, and the entire project was originally conceived by him as a hoax designed to ridicule the Catholic Church and its superstitions, exposing its obscurantism and fanaticism. However, the exposure did not completely destroy the myths, which had already taken root in the minds of millions of people, fueled by their fears and prejudices. These stories continued to live their own lives, supported by conspiracy theorists, writers, and proponents of conspiracy theories, finding more and more followers. Were there any other sources of myths? Another source of myths about the connection of Masons with occultism and Satanism were certain secret societies of the 19th century, which did practice mystical and occult rituals, borrowing some elements of Masonic symbolism, creating confusion and increasing suspicions. For example, the famous Order of the Golden Dawn, which appeared in England in 1888, actively used Masonic ritual elements, although it was not directly related to Freemasonry itself, misleading the uninitiated. How did this affect public opinion? In the public mind, such organizations became confused with real Masonic lodges, reinforcing the myth that Masons were engaged in occult magic and secret rites, attracting sorcerers and wizards into their ranks. In the 20th century, the situation was further exacerbated by various conspiracy theories, especially after the publication of the book The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which became one of the most famous and scandalous forgeries in history. What did the protocols claim? It was a forged document that linked Masons to a global conspiracy, the goal of which was to establish world domination and destroy traditional values. As a result, the image of Masons as secret conspirators became firmly associated with something dark and sinister, arousing fear and hatred. How did totalitarian regimes use these myths? At the same time, some totalitarian regimes in Europe, especially Nazi Germany, used these myths to justify the persecution of Masons, presenting them as secret enemies of society and the state, seeking to undermine national unity and destroy the Aryan race. Thus, the legends about Satanism and occultism in Freemasonry were never based on real facts, but were formed due to a combination of several factors, creating a false image of the brotherhood. What are the main reasons for the emergence of myths? The legends about Satanism and occultism in Freemasonry were never based on real facts, but were formed due to a combination of several factors: the closed nature of the brotherhood, religious and political struggles, as well as the deliberate mystifications of individual authors and organizations seeking to achieve their own goals. Despite numerous exposures, these myths continue to exist in the mass consciousness today, fueling interest in Freemasonry and at the same time generating misunderstanding and fear of it, preventing an objective assessment of its contribution to the development of society. How did Masons influence society? From the very beginning of its appearance, Freemasonry attracted the attention of people who sought not only personal spiritual. One of the most striking and significant examples of the influence of Freemasonry on world history was the American Revolution, during which the colonies of North America gained independence from Great Britain and formed the United States of America, becoming an example for other countries and peoples. Many of the founding fathers of America were active members of Masonic lodges, sharing common ideals of freedom, equality, and brotherhood, and using their connections to achieve political goals. Who were these Masons? George Washington, the very first president of the United States, not only was a Freemason himself, but also openly displayed his affiliation with the Brotherhood, personally performing the Masonic cornerstone laying ritual for the Capitol in 1793, symbolizing the importance of building the new nation on a solid foundation. A little-known, yet fascinating fact. On this day, Washington was wearing a traditional Masonic apron adorned with the Brotherhood's symbols, and the ceremony was accompanied by symbolic gestures and the reading of special texts, emphasizing the importance of the new nation, founded on the principles of brotherhood and equality, creating an atmosphere of unity and solemnity. Who else was an important Freemason in America? Equally important was the role of Benjamin Franklin, who not only helped create the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, but also actively used his connections in French Masonic circles to secure the support of European allies. It was through Franklin's diplomatic efforts in the French lodges that the states received critically important support from France in the form of weapons, a navy, and money, without which victory in the War of Independence would have been impossible. Franklin enjoyed immense respect among European Freemasons and even participated in the work of the famous Parisian lodge, 9 Sisters, where he was personally greeted with honors worthy of a king, emphasizing his contribution to the dissemination of Masonic ideas and principles. How did Freemasonry influence the French Revolution? Another striking example of the influence of Freemasonry on politics was the French Revolution of 1789, which led to the overthrow of the monarchy and the establishment of the Republic, proclaiming new ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Among its leaders, there were indeed many Freemasons, such as Count Mirabeau, Georges Danton, and Marquis de Lafayette, who played a key role in organizing and carrying out the revolution. It was Lafayette, a hero of 2 revolutions, who became one of the central figures, uniting around him liberally minded nobles and the bourgeoisie, striving for political change. What role did Lafayette play? He was a member of the Lodge of St. John in Paris, where ideas of constitutional monarchy and civil liberties were actively discussed. Plans for reforms and strategies for combating absolutism were developed. Moreover, Masonic lodges were one of the few venues where representatives of various strata of French society could openly talk about the need for radical change, without fear of persecution and censorship, contributing to the formation of public opinion and the dissemination of revolutionary ideas. This significantly influenced the fact that the ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity became the official slogan of the revolution, inspiring people to fight for their rights and freedoms. How did Freemasonry influence Latin America? An important example of the influence of Freemasonry was the struggle for independence in Latin American countries in the early 19th century, when the region freed itself from colonial oppression and formed independent states. The central figure was the legendary Simon Bolivar, who liberated Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia from Spanish rule, becoming a national hero and a symbol of the struggle for freedom. Where did Bolivar become a Freemason? Bolivar joined a Masonic lodge in London back in 1803, where he was introduced to progressive European ideas of liberty and equality, which inspired him to fight for the liberation of Latin America. Later, he actively used the network of Masonic connections to secure the support of revolutionaries throughout the continent, organizing uprisings and coordinating the actions of insurgents. Masonic lodges in Latin America became centers for planning rebellions, allowing people of different nationalities and social statuses to unite in a common struggle against colonialism, uniting them around common ideals and goals. How did Bolivar use the Masonic network? Thus, thanks to the Masonic network, Bolivar was able to create a broad international coalition of supporters of independence, which played a key role in liberating Latin America from Spanish rule. Freemasons also played a key role in the unification of Italy, which for a long time had been fragmented into many small states. What role did Garibaldi play? Giuseppe Garibaldi himself, the legendary revolutionary and national hero of Italy, did not hide his membership in Masonic lodges and was proud of it, seeing in Freemasonry a source of inspiration and strength. In 1864, Garibaldi was even elected Grand Master of the East of Italy, which testified to his influence and authority among Italian Freemasons. How did Garibaldi use Freemasonry? Thanks to this, he was able to unite disparate groups of revolutionaries and liberals throughout the country, coordinating their actions and directing their efforts to achieve a common goal. There is evidence that Garibaldi and his supporters specifically used Masonic symbols and rituals to strengthen the revolutionary spirit and unity among their soldiers, uniting them around common ideals and values. As a result, Italy gained national independence and became a unified state, thanks to the efforts of Garibaldi and his associates. What about Great Britain? In Britain, Freemasons also actively influenced political and social processes of the 18th and 19th centuries, holding important positions in government and society. It is known that Winston Churchill, the future Prime Minister of Great Britain, was initiated into a Masonic lodge in 1901, although he did not become a particularly active member, which, however, does not diminish the importance of Freemasonry in British history. What did Freemasons do in Great Britain? Earlier, in the 19th century, British Masonic lodges actively contributed to reforms in education, charity, and social assistance, creating schools and orphanages for the poor, helping those in need, and promoting the development of society. Thus, Freemasonry has never been a hand secretly controlling the world, as conspiracy theorists claim, building their theories on speculation and prejudice. What was Freemasonry really? In reality, it provided influential people with an intellectual platform on which ideas capable of changing society were discussed and shaped, promoting the development of democracy, humanism, and social justice. Thanks to its high ideals, such as equality, fraternity, and humanism, Freemasonry has played a significant role in many historical events influencing world history. What are the main achievements of Freemasons? Thanks to their high ideals, such as equality, fraternity, and humanism, Freemasonry has played a significant role in many historical events, from the American Revolution to the struggle for independence in Latin America and the unification of Italy, thus having a tangible and long-term impact on the development of world history, contributing to the formation of new values and ideals. But why are there so many secrets and conspiracies surrounding Freemasonry? Perhaps no secret society in history has been subjected to as many speculations and accusations of conspiracy as the Freemasons, who have become the object of numerous theories and speculations. From the very beginning of their history, they have found themselves at the center of the most incredible conspiracy theories, often having nothing to do with reality. What is the reason for the popularity of conspiracy theories about Freemasons? The first serious wave of suspicion about a global Masonic conspiracy appeared shortly after the French Revolution, which shook the foundations of European society and caused fear and distrust of any secret organizations. In 18th century Europe, shaken by radical changes and chaos, there was a need to explain such a sharp coup not by simple historical reasons, but by the influence of certain secret forces striving to destroy the traditional order. Thus was born the popular version of Augustin Barruel, who in his book Memoirs on Jacobinism stated that the revolution was the result of a deliberate conspiracy by Freemasons, Enlightenment thinkers, and Jacobins united to achieve their goals. What did Barruel claim? Barruel claimed that the lodges were specifically preparing revolutionary sentiments in order to destroy traditional institutions of power and religion, sowing chaos and anarchy in society. The book became a bestseller, and its theses quickly spread throughout Europe, forming a persistent image of Freemasons as revolutionary conspirators striving for world domination. What role did the Taxil hoax play? The next significant episode in the history of Masonic myths was the sensational hoax of Leo Taxil, a French writer who, through his writings, dealt a serious blow to the reputation of Freemasonry. Taxil, a former anti-clerical and then returning to Catholicism, decided to discredit the Freemasons, presenting them in his books as Satanists and worshippers of Lucifer, worshipping the forces of evil. What did Taxil invent? He invented a secret organization called Palladium, which supposedly controlled all the lodges in the world and worshipped the forces of evil, spreading its ideas around the world and recruiting new members. His fantastic stories were taken seriously, even by the Vatican, and printed in hundreds of thousands of copies, causing shock and outrage in society. However, did Taxil admit to the deception? However, in 1897, Taxil publicly confessed that it was all a fabrication and a grand hoax, exposing his own writings and causing a scandal in society. Nevertheless, the damage to the reputation of Freemasonry had already been done, and the idea of Freemasons as Satanists was entrenched in the minds of the general public for a long time, fueling fears and prejudices. How did the Protocols of the Elders of Zion influence the image of Freemasons? As we already know, at the beginning of the 20th century, another no less scandalous hoax appeared, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which became one of the most famous and dangerous forgeries in history. This fake document described an allegedly secret program of world domination in which Jewish and Masonic conspirators sought to destroy traditional states, monarchies, and establish their domination, enslaving all nations. What happened to this document? Despite the fact that the document was officially recognized as a forgery as early as 1921, it was actively used by various anti-Semitic and anti-Masonic movements, including Nazi propaganda, to incite hatred and persecute Freemasons. This further solidified the image of Freemasons as a secret organization striving for world control, sparking fear and distrust of them. But is there any truth to this? Interestingly, the myth of a unified global Masonic leadership, the so-called world government, completely ignores the actual structure of Freemasonry, which has nothing to do with reality. Lodges have never been subordinate to a single international center, and there has never been a supreme Masonic leader who would direct the actions of Freemasons around the world, which makes all theories about a world government absurd. So how is Freemasonry really structured? On the contrary, Masonic organizations have always maintained autonomy and independence, and have sometimes even been in conflict with each other due to differences in views or interests, lacking a unified goal or strategy. This completely contradicts the idea of a global Masonic government coordinating events on the planet and confirms that all conspiracy theories are mere fiction. What can be said about the influence of Freemasons on revolutions? The widespread myth that Freemasons completely controlled revolutions is also far from historical reality and is not supported by any facts. Although many revolutionary figures did belong to lodges, this did not mean that Masonic organizations controlled revolutions, directing their course and determining their goals. What role did Masonic lodges play in revolutions? Rather, lodges served as a convenient intellectual platform where progressive and revolutionary ideas could be freely disseminated and discussed, contributing to the formation of public opinion and the spread of advanced views. But revolutionary events themselves were never centrally prepared or directed by any Masonic headquarters, as they were the result of complex social and political processes. Was there unity among Freemasons? On the contrary, revolutionaries and conservatives who were strongly opposed to any changes could simultaneously be Freemasons, holding different views and beliefs. For example, during the French Revolution, both supporters of a constitutional monarchy and radical republicans were Freemasons, and they were in fierce conflict with each other, pursuing different goals. Why are conspiratorial theories about Freemasonry so widespread? The reason for the widespread prevalence of conspiratorial theories about Freemasons is simple. People always try to explain complex historical events using clear and simple schemes, preferring to look for some single hidden force instead of recognizing the chaotic nature of human history, which requires deeper analysis. Freemasonry, with its secrecy and mysterious rituals, was ideally suited for this role, especially during periods of crisis and uncertainty, becoming a convenient object for accusations and suspicions. What was the history of Freemasonry in Russia? If in Europe, Freemasonry became the object of conspiracy theories and conspiratorial suspicions immediately after major revolutions, in Russia, its history unfolded somewhat differently, having its own features and distinctions. Russian Freemasons never created secret governments and did not stand behind mass uprisings striving for political change. On the contrary, 18th-century Russian Freemasons were closely associated with enlightened circles of society, often holding high positions in the imperial court and enjoying the patronage of the authorities. How did Russian monarchs view Freemasons? However, the attitude of Russian monarchs towards Freemasons varied greatly depending on the personality of the emperor and the political atmosphere in the country, being subjected to both support and persecution. Freemasonry penetrated Russia during the reign of Peter the Great, but its heyday began during the reign of Catherine the Great, especially in the second half of the 18th century, when Masonic lodges became centers of intellectual life and philanthropy. How did Catherine the Great view Freemasons? Empress Catherine herself never belonged to Masonic lodges and viewed them with some suspicion, fearing their influence on society and a possible threat to her power. However, among her inner circle were many high-ranking Freemasons who had a significant impact on social and cultural life, contributing to the spread of advanced ideas and values. For example, one of the influential Freemasons at court was Prince Alexander Mikhailovich Golitsyn, who held important government posts and enjoyed the personal trust of the Empress, which allowed him to influence decision-making. He not only participated in the work of the lodges, but also contributed to the dissemination of Enlightenment ideas in Russian society, supporting the development of science and art. Who else was in the Empress's circle? In those days, Masonic lodges gathered around themselves the cream of the Russian nobility, from influential aristocrats and dignitaries to prominent writers and intellectuals, striving for knowledge and spiritual development. One of the most famous and authoritative Russian lodges was the Three Stars Lodge, created in St. Petersburg and enjoying great influence in society. Its ranks included such famous figures as journalist and publisher Nikolai Ivanovich Novikov, senator and political figure Ivan Perfilyevich Elegin, writer Alexander Nikolaevich Radishchev, and many others who left a noticeable mark on the history of Russia. What were the goals of Russian Freemasons? An important feature of Russian Freemasons was their focus not on revolution, but on the spiritual and moral development of society, improving the lives of people and spreading enlightenment. Members of the lodges actively engaged in charity, opened printing houses and libraries, published magazines and books, promoting the ideas of moral self-development, enlightenment, and public benefit, striving for harmony and prosperity in Russia. What did Novikov do? A particularly striking example of the influence of Freemasons in Russia was the activity of Nikolai Ivanovich Novikov, an outstanding educator and public figure who made a huge contribution to the development of Russian culture. As a staunch supporter of education, he opened a printing house and established the publication of magazines and books that circulated the progressive ideas of the time, introducing Russian readers to the achievements of world science and culture. What did Novikov publish? Thanks to Novikov, the works of French Enlightenment philosophers, books on natural sciences, economics and philosophy appeared en masse in Russia, enriching Russian intellectual thought and contributing to the formation of progressive views. Catherine the Great initially favored such activities, seeing them as a means of enlightening society, but soon became alarmed, noticing how quickly ideas that could undermine the traditional monarchical system were spreading, threatening her power. What happened to Novikov? As a result, Novikov was arrested in 1792, his printing house was closed, and the activities of Masonic lodges came under close scrutiny by the authorities, restricting their freedom and opportunities. With the accession to the throne of Emperor Paul I in 1796, the attitude of the Russian throne towards Freemasons changed dramatically, leading to new repressions and restrictions. How did Paul I view Freemasons? Paul was inclined to see any secret organization as a threat to the stability of his rule and the political order, fearing their influence on society and possible connection with revolutionary movements. Fearing the influence of the revolutionary ideas of the French Revolution, he banned the activities of all Masonic lodges in 1798, and the ban was harsh and comprehensive, leaving no loopholes for Freemasons. What punishments awaited Freemasons? Freemasons who had previously held high positions were forced to publicly renounce their membership in lodges, and violators faced Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin, although not formally a member of Masonic lodges, was closely associated with people who actively participated in their activities, influencing the formation of his worldview and creative method. Masonic ideas had a significant impact on the poet's worldview and were reflected in his work, permeating his works with a spirit of freedom and humanism. Who did Pushkin associate with? In particular, his close relationship with the Decembrists, many of whom were Freemasons and shared liberal views, striving for political change in Russia, is well known. Communication with them contributed to the formation of Pushkin's liberal views and was reflected in his works, such as Eugene Onegin and Boris Godunov, where he raised issues of freedom, morality, and the responsibility of man to society. How did Masonic ideas affect Pushkin's work? In addition, his poetry was permeated with reflections on freedom, morality, and the role of the individual in history, key themes discussed in Masonic circles at that time, contributing to the formation of public opinion and the spread of advanced ideas. Another notable representative of Freemasonry in Russian culture was Alexander Fedorovich Labzin, a philosopher, writer, and publisher who actively promoted the ideas of enlightenment and moral perfection, contributing to the development of Russian culture and education. What did Labzin publish? In the 1810s, he published the journal Zion's Bulletin, which became the center of the spiritual life of Russian society at that time, attracting the attention of advanced thinkers and public figures. The journal published philosophical articles, translations of foreign thinkers, and materials directly related to Masonic philosophy, introducing readers to the achievements of world science and culture. How was the journal received in society? The publication was a great success with the enlightened public and made the ideas of moral self-development and public service widely known among the Russian elite, contributing to the formation of progressive views and values. However, after the Decembrist revolt in 1825, the government of Nicholas I again unleashed repressions on Masonic lodges, seeing them as a threat to its power. What happened after the revolt? For the following decades, Freemasonry existed in Russia exclusively underground, significantly losing its influence and effectively ceasing open activity, experiencing persecution and restrictions. A brief resurgence of Freemasonry occurred at the beginning of the 20th century when various social and intellectual movements reactivated in Russia after the Revolution of 1905, opening new opportunities for Masons. What was happening at the beginning of the 20th century? Lodges reappeared in St. Petersburg, Moscow, and major cities of the Russian Empire. But their activities were not as noticeable or influential as in the 18th or 19th centuries, being confined to a narrow circle of intellectuals and public figures. After the October Revolution of 1917, the new Soviet government immediately outlawed Masonic organizations. Firstly, Freemasonry has maintained its traditional purpose. It is still a community where people can discuss moral, philosophical, and intellectual issues in an atmosphere of mutual respect and equality, broadening their horizons and exchanging knowledge. Modern Masons regularly gather for meetings, conduct rituals and discussions, and study philosophical works and historical documents to better understand the world and themselves. How do modern discussions differ from previous ones? But today, their discussions no longer have the secret nature that generated so many myths in the past, as Masons have become more open and transparent in their activities. However, the main focus of Masons in the 21st century is charity and social work, helping those in need and supporting public initiatives. How do Masons engage in charity? For example, in the United States and the United Kingdom, Masons annually allocate tens of millions of dollars to medical research, assistance to children's hospitals, support for educational programs and universities, as well as social projects around the world, providing significant assistance to those in need. Masonic organizations fund hospitals, provide assistance to children with serious illnesses, organize free clinics and programs to help the poor and elderly, improving their quality of life. How developed is the medical care provided by Masons? In some countries, such as the United States, Masonic hospitals and medical centers are considered among the best in terms of service and medical care, providing highly qualified medical assistance to all those in need. Another important area of activity for modern Masons is supporting education and culture, promoting the intellectual and spiritual development of society. How do Masons support education? Lodges often sponsor educational institutions, provide scholarships to talented students, finance programs for preserving historical heritage and restoring architectural monuments, supporting culture and education. For example, in the United Kingdom, Masons regularly donate large sums to the restoration of historical buildings, not only those associated with the Brotherhood, but also those of cultural and national value, preserving historical heritage for future generations. What is the Masonic view on politics? As for political influence, modern Masons differ significantly from their predecessors in the 18th and 19th centuries, not seeking political power and not interfering in political processes. Today, Freemasonry fundamentally emphasizes its apolitical nature, not supporting any political parties or movements. Why are Masons apolitical? Lodges prohibit open discussion of political and religious issues at meetings to avoid divisions and conflicts within the Brotherhood, preserving unity and harmony. This rule is observed almost everywhere and strictly controlled by the leadership of Masonic organizations, not allowing political discussions. For this reason, the real influence of Masons on politics and decision-making today is minimal and significantly less than the level they had in the past, not claiming political power. How is Freemasonry perceived in the modern world? Despite the openness and transparency of modern lodges, Freemasonry continues to evoke many myths and distrust among some people who are accustomed to seeing some hidden motives and secret goals behind it, fueling conspiracy theories. In reality, Freemasonry in the 21st century is a public organization with a philosophical bias, aimed primarily at moral self-development, mutual assistance, and charity, contributing to the development of society. How do Masons present themselves to the world? Modern Masons openly talk about their goals, publish information about members and events, and try to maintain a positive public image, dispelling centuries-old myths and speculations, striving for transparency and openness. Freemasonry has long become not only a subject of study for historians, but also a vivid image of mass culture, attracting the attention of writers and filmmakers. How is Freemasonry represented in culture? In modern cinema, literature, and even video games, it is regularly used as a central theme or an important plot element, creating mysterious and captivating stories. The reason for this is simple. The mystery of the Masons, their secret rituals, unusual symbolism, and centuries-old history easily attract attention and awaken the imagination of the general public, inspiring the creation of works of art. What can be said about the book, The Da Vinci Code? Perhaps the most famous example of such cultural influence was the book by American writer Dan Brown, The Da Vinci Code, which became a worldwide bestseller and aroused great interest in secret societies. Although the novel formally tells about the secrets of the Catholic Church and societies that were associated with ancient mystical secrets, it significantly fueled interest in Masons, making secret societies one of the most popular topics of the early 21st century. How are Brown's other books related to Masons? Brown's subsequent works, especially The Lost Symbol, are directly related to Masons and their legends, telling about the secrets stored in Masonic lodges. In these books, the Brotherhood is presented as the guardian of ancient secrets and knowledge, possessing significant influence on world events, creating an exciting and intriguing plot. Despite the artistic exaggerations and fantasies of the author, such works have significantly influenced the perception of Freemasonry, making it a topic of discussion and public interest throughout the world. What about the movie National Treasure? Another striking example is the famous film National Treasure with Nicolas Cage, where the plot is based on the search for secret knowledge and values guarded for centuries by Masons, creating an atmosphere of adventure and mystery. The film is not only an entertaining adventure blockbuster, but also a picture in which Masons are depicted as carriers of important historical and cultural heritage, contributing to the preservation of values. What role did this film play? Although the film itself does not claim historical accuracy, it played an important role in popularizing the image of Freemasonry among a wide audience, making it more understandable and appealing. In literature, in addition to Dan Brown's books, there are dozens of novels where Freemasonry plays a key role, inspiring writers to create captivating stories. What can be said about the novel Foucault's Pendulum? One of the most prominent examples is the book by Italian writer Umberto Eco, Foucault's Pendulum, which became one of the most famous intellectual novels of the 20th century. In this deep and intellectual novel, Masonic and occult societies act as a central element of a convoluted narrative, revealing the nature of human belief in conspiracies and mysticism, exploring the boundaries of reason and fantasy. Eco uses Freemasonry not so much to describe real historical facts, but to reflect on the phenomenon of faith and its influence on society, showing how easily people succumb to mystifications and believe in conspiracies, especially in times of crisis and uncertainty. Video games also actively use the image of Masons, creating fascinating and captivating plots. How is Freemasonry represented in video games? The famous Assassin's Creed series of games directly addresses the theme of secret societies, Illuminati, and Masons, depicting them as participants in a centuries-old conflict between good and evil, influencing the course of history and the fate of humanity. The games in this series are very popular, and their plots, based on alternative history and conspiracy theories, have significantly influenced the formation of the image of Masons in the mass consciousness, especially among young people, familiarizing them with Masonic symbolism and ideas. How have video games influenced interest in Freemasonry? Despite the fantasy and fictional nature of the plots, they have spawned a whole generation of fans who are sincerely interested in the history of the Brotherhood and the secrets associated with it, seeking to learn more about Masonic philosophy and rituals. However, it is worth noting that such widespread cultural use of the image of Masons does not always benefit them, creating a distorted view of Freemasonry. How is the image of Masons distorted in culture? Books, films, and games often significantly distort real historical facts and the nature of Freemasonry, creating a false impression of what modern lodges actually do, attributing various atrocities and conspiracies to them. On the other hand, such popularity attracts public attention to the history of Freemasonry, encouraging many people to study this topic more deeply and separate fiction from real facts, forming a more objective opinion about the Brotherhood. What is the role of Freemasonry in culture? Thus, Freemasonry today has firmly entered popular culture as a symbol of mystery, ancient knowledge, and enigmatic rituals, inspiring artists and writers to create works of art. Works related to Masons arouse great interest, stimulate discussions and debates, and also make the public think about issues of history, morality, and spirituality, contributing to the development of critical thinking and broadening horizons. What does Freemasonry mean to the world today? Perhaps the most significant aspect is that through its influence on popular culture, Freemasonry remains a vibrant part of human history today, continuing to draw attention and inspire individuals towards self-improvement and service to society. This concludes our journey into the enigmatic and fascinating world of Freemasonry, offering you fresh insights and perspectives. We have explored its history, myths, influence on politics and culture, and hopefully we have managed to separate reality from conjecture, presenting you with an objective view of Freemasonry.